breaking. After 2,500 years, the most terrifying disappearance in military history may finally have been solved, and what archaeologists found in a remote desert valley suggests that 50,000 Persian soldiers were killed by something far more powerful than any human enemy. The evidence of what destroyed them that day has been sitting in the Sahara for 25 centuries, waiting for someone brave enough to find it. We're starting this story in 524 BC. Cambyses II is the king of Persia and the ruler of the largest empire the world has ever seen. His father Cyrus the Great had conquered Babylon and freed the Jewish captives. Cambyses himself had conquered Egypt and captured the pharaoh and extended Persian rule across the entire known world. There was only one place in his domain that still openly defied him, the oasis of Siwa in the western desert of Egypt. Home to the Oracle of Amun, a temple so sacred that even Alexander the Great would travel there a century later to be proclaimed a god. The oracle's priests refused to acknowledge Cambyses as the legitimate ruler of Egypt. This enraged the Persian king. He summoned his generals and issued an order. 50,000 of his finest soldiers would march across the desert and destroy the temple of Amun. They would burn it to the ground and slaughter the priests and erase the oracle from existence. The army assembled at Thebes and began its march west into the Sahara. They carried supplies for a 2-week journey across terrain that had never been crossed by an army that size. They brought weapons and pack animals and water skins and everything they believed they would need. Their destination was 400 miles away across the most hostile landscape on Earth. The army passed through the Karga oasis to resupply with fresh water. They filled every container they had and turned north towards Siwa. This was the last confirmed sighting of the Persian army. After Karga, the desert swallowed them whole. 50,000 men simply ceased to exist. The Greek historian Herodotus, writing approximately 100 years after the event, provided the only surviving account of what happened. He wrote that a massive sandstorm of catastrophic proportions engulfed the entire army while it was marching through a narrow desert valley. 50,000 men were buried alive in a single afternoon. Their bodies were never recovered, and their weapons were never found, and their fate became one of the great unsolved mysteries of the ancient world. For 2,500 years, professional historians dismissed Herodotus' account as mythology. No army that large could possibly vanish without leaving any physical evidence whatsoever. 50,000 soldiers, with their equipment and their animals and their supply train, would leave traces that would survive for centuries. Metal weapons and stone tools and bone fragments would persist in the dry desert environment long after the bodies had decayed. Archaeological expeditions to the western desert in the 19th and early 20th centuries found nothing. The lost army of Cambyses was declared a legend. Then in the 1990s, 2 Italian archaeologists named Angelo and Alfredo Castiglione began systematically exploring the western Egyptian desert. The Castiglione brothers were not looking for the lost army. They were studying ancient trade routes and investigating Bronze Age settlements and water sources along the margins of the Sahara. But local Bedouin tribesmen who had lived in the desert for generations kept telling them strange stories. Stories about a remote valley where human bones and metal fragments were scattered across the ground like gravel. A place the Bedouins avoided because they believed it was cursed. A place they simply called the Valley of the Skeletons. The brothers spent more than a decade following these rumors. They interviewed dozens of Bedouin elders and cross-referenced their descriptions with satellite imagery and topographical maps. They identified a location in the far western desert of Egypt near the Libyan border, a dry riverbed flanked by towering cliffs of sandstone and limestone, a natural funnel where wind would be channeled and accelerated until it reached lethal force. In 2009, the brothers announced their findings to the world. In that remote valley, they had discovered hundreds of human bones bleached white by millennia of sun exposure. Mixed among the skeletal remains, they found bronze arrowheads and spear tips and fragments of armor that matched known Persian designs from the Achaemenid period. They found pottery shards bearing Persian inscriptions and the remains of what appeared to be a large mass grave. Radiocarbon dating of the bone and charcoal samples returned dates of approximately 2,500 years ago, exactly the time period of Cambyses and the Lost Army. The location matched the route that an army traveling from Karga to Siwa would have taken. A narrow valley approximately 10 kilometers long and less than half a kilometer wide in places. The geology of the site told the rest of the story. The valley floor was composed of fine windblown sand that had been deposited over centuries. Above it, the cliffs showed evidence of massive sand deposition events, the kind of deposits that only occurred during catastrophic storms. The kind of storm that would fill a confined valley with millions of tons of sand in less than an hour. Consider the physics of what Herodotus described. A haboob is a type of intense sandstorm that can reach heights of over 5,000 feet and stretch across the horizon for hundreds of miles. Wind speeds within a haboob can exceed 60 miles per hour. The wall of airborne sand is dense enough to turn day into night and reduce visibility to absolute zero. The sand is so thick in the air that breathing becomes impossible within seconds. If a haboob of this magnitude struck an army marching through a narrow confined valley, the result would be instantaneous and total catastrophe. 50,000 men would lose sight of each other immediately. They would not know which direction to run, and they could not hear orders over the roar of the wind. They would stumble into each other and into rock walls and into their own pack animals. Those who were not crushed by the stampeding animals would suffocate within minutes as their lungs filled with fine desert sand. The storm would bury them where they fell. Their bodies would be entombed beneath layers of compacted sediment that would harden over time into solid rock. The desert would consume them as thoroughly and as remorselessly as the ocean consumes a sinking ship. The Egyptian government granted the Castiglione brothers permission to conduct a full archaeological excavation of the site. But the revolution of 2011 intervened. All archaeological work in the western desert was suspended indefinitely. The region became too dangerous for foreign researchers due to militant activity and political instability. The brothers were forced to abandon their work. Angelo Castiglione passed away in 2015, and his brother Falfredo followed him in 2018. Their maps and their notes and their photographs are archived at the University of Milan in Italy. The site remains unexcavated. The bones are still there, scattered across the floor of a nameless valley that the Bedouins are afraid to enter. No one has returned with ground-penetrating radar or modern forensic archaeology equipment. No one has mapped the full extent of the bone field or attempted to estimate the true number of individuals buried at the site. No one has definitively proven or disproven that those bones belong to the 50,000 soldiers of Cambyses. But the evidence is compelling enough that the lost army has been quietly removed from the category of legend and placed into the category of unsolved mysteries awaiting confirmation. Herodotus may have been telling the exact truth. 50,000 men destroyed by the desert itself. a supernatural event to the people who heard about it a century later. But, to modern science, a perfectly explainable meteorological phenomenon that happens to occur in precisely the kind of terrain where an army would be at its most vulnerable. The desert chooses its own monuments. And somewhere in the western desert of Egypt, beneath the sand that killed them, 50,000 Persian soldiers are still waiting for their story to be told. If you want more stories about history's greatest disappearances and the discoveries that finally solve centuries-old mysteries, hit like and subscribe to Forgotten Files. Turn on the notification bell so you never miss an episode. And leave a comment telling us what lost army or lost civilization you want us to investigate next, because we read every single suggestion.